I always knew my mother-in-law hated me. She didn't even try to hide it. From the very first day we met, she made it clear that I was the enemy. And all because I dared to marry her perfect son, the son she always imagined with someone else. I'm Olivia, 33 years old, and I've been married to Alex for 5 years. We met at work. I was in the legal department of a big company, and he was one of the managers. Our romance moved quickly, and within a year, he proposed. It seemed like a fairy tale. But the real problem? His mother, Linda. Linda disliked me from the start. At first, it was subtle, offhand comments, comparisons to his ex, Emily. Oh, Emily was such an amazing cook. Alex always loved her casseroles, she would say at every opportunity. Or, Emily always gave the most thoughtful gifts. She just knew what Alex liked. I put up with it. I tried to be polite, to avoid conflict. But over time, her dislike turned into outright hostility. It started with small things. She would invite Alex to family dinners and somehow always forget to tell me. Or she'd claim she gave me the wrong date by mistake. Then she began openly insulting me. You don't take care of yourself at all, Olivia. Alex deserves better, she once said in front of guests, and everyone just awkwardly laughed. Alex never defended me. He would just sigh and say, come on, it's just mom. She doesn't mean anything by it. And that frustrated me even more. But the worst happened at that one family dinner. The evening started out normally. Alex and I arrived at his parents' house, where his whole family was gathered, his brother, his sister, uncles, aunts, even distant cousins. As usual, Linda acted like I didn't exist. She walked straight up to Alex, pulled him into a hug, kissed his cheeks and said, "Oh, I'm so happy to see you, sweetheart." She completely ignored me. I just pressed my lips together and stayed quiet. Dinner went on, and everyone was chatting, laughing. Linda spent the entire evening showering compliments on everyone, except me. I was used to it, so I just ate in silence. But then she stood up, tapped her fork against her glass, and said, "I have an important announcement to make." The room fell silent. She looked directly at me and said, "I want to officially announce that I no longer consider Olivia part of this family." A heavy silence filled the room. I froze. What? She just officially declared me an outsider? I turned to Alex, waiting for him to step in, to defend me, but he only shrugged apologetically and mumbled, "Mom, maybe not now. Not now. Not now." I felt my face flush with heat. No one said a word. Some of the relatives looked down at their plates, avoiding eye contact. Not a single person stood up for me. Linda, meanwhile, was enjoying every second. "Alex," she said gently, "we all know you made a mistake marrying her. She's not the right one for you. You had the perfect woman, Emily. We all know that." And that's when it hit me. This wasn't just about humiliating me. She was trying to convince Alex to leave me. I slowly stood up. "Excuse me," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I need to go." I waited for some kind of reaction from Alex. For him to get up and leave with me. For him to say something, anything. But he just sat there, staring down at his plate. Linda smiled. I picked up my bag and walked out without another word. Outside the air was cold, but I barely felt it. I stood next to my car, not sure what to do. Go home and wait for Alex? Get a hotel for the night? My phone vibrated in my pocket. A message. From Linda. "You'd be better off not coming back. Alex is finally starting to realize you're not right for him." I inhaled. Slowly exhaled. And at that moment, I knew. Either I fought for my marriage, or I let this woman win. Sitting alone in my apartment that night, staring at my phone, I realized I had two choices. I could either let Linda win, let her continue to humiliate me, push me out of my own marriage, and erase me from Alex's life, or I could fight back. And for the first time in 5 years, I decided I wouldn't take the high road. I wouldn't ignore her insults, endure her cruelty, or wait for Alex to finally grow a backbone. No, this time I was going to hit her where it hurt the most. Linda wasn't just a controlling mother-in-law. She was a powerful woman in her own right. She held a high-ranking position as the chief financial officer at a prestigious investment firm, a job that gave her authority, influence, and a six-figure salary. She thrived on power, on being respected and feared. But I knew something that could destroy all of that. A few months ago, completely by accident, I had stumbled upon something disturbing. At a family gathering, Linda had been ranting about how idiots at work had been questioning some expense reports she had approved. She had brushed it off as office politics, but the way she spoke about it caught my attention. She was irritated. Not because she had been accused of something serious, but because she believed she was untouchable. At the time, I had let it go. But later that night, when Alex had fallen asleep, I had done something I never told anyone about. I had looked into her company. It wasn't hard. Linda wasn't exactly cautious with her work laptop when she was at home, and Alex had once given me the password to their home Wi-Fi. With a little digging, I found out that her firm had been audited the previous year due to financial inconsistencies in expense reports. The audit had concluded without any major consequences, but I knew better. When financial fraud is involved, the first time someone gets caught is rarely the first time they've done it. Curious, I had started paying attention to her behavior. Over the past year, I had noticed how she frequently mentioned expensive business trips that never seemed to have an actual purpose, how she talked about adjusting numbers so that certain reports wouldn't raise questions, and how she always made sure her department controlled financial approvals without much oversight. And then, a few weeks ago, I had overheard her on a call, snapping at someone about not leaving a damn paper trail. I hadn't done anything with that information back then. Maybe because I was too focused on saving my marriage, too naive to believe she could push things this far. But now, sitting in my apartment, abandoned by my own husband and humiliated in front of an entire family, I knew exactly what I had to do. I spent the next 3 days collecting everything I could. I searched through old emails she had carelessly left open on her laptop the last time we visited, saved copies of financial reports that didn't quite add up, and even managed to access some company files from a shared folder she had on her home computer. I wasn't a financial expert, but I didn't need to be. What I found was obvious. Falsified expense reports, personal charges disguised as business expenses, fake vendor invoices. It was all there. Once I had everything, I compiled it into an anonymous report and sent it directly to the company's HR and internal audit team. I didn't just send vague accusations. I attached every single document, every suspicious transaction, every report that showed the pattern of fraud she had been committing for years. I made sure there was no way they could ignore it. And then I waited. The first sign that something had happened came exactly 1 week later. Linda usually posted online about her power lunches and corporate meetings, but suddenly, she had gone silent. No posts, no updates, nothing. Then Alex called me. I ignored him. A few hours later, I got a text from my best friend Sarah, who worked in corporate law. Did you hear about Linda? I played dumb. What happened? She got suspended. Something about a financial investigation. It's all over her office. People are saying she might actually get fired. I could have laughed, but I forced myself to keep it together. Wow, I texted back. That's crazy. Crazy didn't even begin to describe what happened next. By the end of the second week, Linda's name was no longer on her company's website. Her firm issued a vague statement about ongoing internal reviews in their finance department, and rumors started circulating. Employees whispered about missing funds, unauthorized payments, and luxury trips disguised as business expenses. Some even speculated that the company might press charges. And then, it got even worse for her. Reporters got wind of the story. A financial blog picked it up, then a larger business news outlet. Her company had no choice but to release an official statement confirming that Linda had been terminated due to serious violations of corporate financial policies. They didn't say fraud outright, but everyone knew what it meant. Linda's reputation, the thing she had spent decades building, was in ruins. She tried to fight back, of course. She made desperate calls to former colleagues, tried to spin the story as a witch hunt, even hinted that she was planning to sue for wrongful termination. But no one wanted to be associated with her anymore. The same people who used to fear and respect her now avoided her calls. She was toxic. And Alex? He finally showed up at my apartment 2 days after the official announcement. He looked exhausted, like he hadn't slept in days. She's a mess, he said the moment I opened the door. She's been crying nonstop. She swears someone set her up. I leaned against the doorframe, staring at him. He looked at me like he was waiting for sympathy. I didn't give it to him. She ruined our marriage, Alex, I said, my voice calm but firm. She wanted me out of your life, and she made sure everyone knew it. Now she's facing the consequences of her own actions. He hesitated, then sighed. I didn't think it would get this bad. I didn't respond. What was there to say? That he should have stood up to her sooner? That he should have chosen me instead of cowering in silence while she tore me apart? He ran a hand through his hair. Did you? He stopped himself, shaking his head. Never mind. I knew what he was asking. I didn't confirm anything. Instead, I just smiled, slow, deliberate, knowing. Goodbye, Alex, I said, closing the door. And for the first time in years, I felt free. After everything Linda had done to me, after she had humiliated me, tried to erase me from my own marriage, and played her cruel little power games, I thought I was done with her. I had already destroyed her career, exposed her financial fraud, and left her scrambling to salvage what was left of her life. But then something unexpected happened. I found out she had a secret. And not just any secret, one that would shatter the last bit of dignity she had left. It started with an accident. A few weeks after Linda had been fired, I was still getting used to the peace of not having to deal with her constant interference. But one evening, as I was going through some old emails, something caught my attention. It was an email from Linda, an old one that had been forwarded to Alex months ago. At first, I almost deleted it, but then I noticed something strange. The email wasn't about work, family, or anything I would have expected from her. It was a hotel reservation. A 5-star hotel, booked under a different last name. That alone wasn't enough to raise suspicions. Maybe she had used an alias for privacy reasons. But then I noticed the dates, weekends, always the same pattern, every few months. My gut told me to dig deeper. I still had access to some of Linda's old files, thanks to the time I spent collecting evidence against her. So I started searching. And the deeper I looked, the clearer it became. Linda had been having an affair. Not just a short fling, but a long, carefully hidden relationship. It had been going on for years. The receipts told a story on their own. Expensive dinners at upscale restaurants. Jewelry purchases that didn't match anything she had ever worn in public. Plane tickets for weekend getaways. And then I found the messages. They weren't on her phone, but on an old cloud backup she had used for years. Dozens of messages, some flirtatious, some explicit, some full of desperation and longing. and one name kept appearing over and over again. Richard Collins. At first, the name meant nothing to me. But after a quick search, I realized exactly who he was, a high-profile real estate developer, wealthy, influential, and very much married. His wife, Julia Collins, was a well-known philanthropist and socialite, frequently featured in charity magazines. Linda had spent years presenting herself as a woman of status, a respectable and sophisticated professional. But in reality, she had been sneaking around with a married man, playing the role of the other woman while pretending to be above everyone else. The irony was delicious. But I wasn't going to just sit on this information. No, Linda had taken too much from me. It was time for her to lose something she truly valued, her social standing. I gathered everything. The receipts, the messages, even some blurry photos I managed to recover from her cloud storage. Then, I made contact with the one person who would be most interested in knowing the truth. Julia Collins. I expected it to take time, but to my surprise, she responded almost immediately. It turned out that she had suspected something for years but had never been able to prove it. My evidence changed everything. She wasn't just angry. She was furious. And she wanted revenge. We planned everything carefully. Julia insisted on making the exposure as public as possible. She didn't just want Richard to suffer. She wanted Linda to be humiliated in a way she could never recover from. And so we set the stage. Linda and Richard had a habit of meeting at a particular high-end restaurant, La Reverie, a place known for its exclusivity, where the wealthy and powerful went to see and be seen. Julia made sure that their next meeting wouldn't be private. I wasn't there in person, but Julia sent me updates as the plan unfolded. She walked into the restaurant right as Linda and Richard were seated at their usual secluded table. At first, the other diners barely noticed, just another wealthy woman making an entrance. But then she made sure everyone heard her. "Enjoying your dinner, darling?" she asked loudly, her voice dripping with venom. Richard froze. Linda, completely unaware of what was coming, gave Julia a condescending look. "Julia, what are you doing here?" Linda asked, feigning politeness. Julia didn't answer. Instead, she pulled out her phone and, with a flourish, projected the evidence onto the restaurant's central display screen. Messages, hotel receipts, even the incriminating photos. The restaurant went silent. Gasps spread through the crowd. People pulled out their phones, recording every second. Linda's face drained of color. She turned to Richard, expecting him to defend her. But Richard, now completely exposed, did what cowards do best. He pushed his chair back and tried to leave, abandoning Linda without a word. Linda grabbed his wrist in desperation. "You said you loved me," she hissed, her voice cracking. Julia laughed, a sharp, cruel sound. "Love? Oh, Linda, do you really think he was ever going to leave me for you?" Linda's hands trembled. The whispers around the restaurant grew louder. Someone was already uploading the video to social media. Within minutes, it would be everywhere. Desperate, Linda turned to the crowd. "This is a lie. She's manipulating all of you." But no one believed her. People began openly mocking her. A group of younger women near the bar giggled, whispering, "I always knew she was a snake." A businessman at a nearby table shook his head and muttered, "Pathetic." Security finally intervened, gently but firmly escorting Julia out while Richard fled through the back entrance. Linda, left alone in the middle of the restaurant, looked around, as if searching for someone to save her. No one did. The video spread like wildfire. Within hours, it was all over social media. "Wealthy socialite exposes husband's mistress in public scandal" was the headline of the day. Linda tried to do damage control, but there was no coming back from this. The video was everywhere, played on news segments, dissected in online forums, turned into memes. Her name, once associated with power and status, became a joke. And as I watched it all unfold, I felt no guilt. Because this wasn't just revenge. This was justice. Linda had spent years crafting her perfect image, an influential businesswoman, a devoted wife, a respected member of high society. She controlled everything from her career to her family, making sure that everyone saw her exactly as she wanted to be seen. But now, it was all crumbling around her. After being publicly exposed for fraud and fired in disgrace, Linda had desperately tried to convince everyone that she was innocent, that she had been framed by jealous colleagues, or even by a corporate conspiracy designed to push her out. But no one believed her. The evidence against her was overwhelming. The final blow came when the video surfaced. The one that showed her screaming in a packed restaurant, caught in the middle of an explosive affair scandal. It had all started when I discovered the truth about her longtime secret relationship. Linda had been having an affair with a married man for years, a wealthy businessman named Richard Holloway, a senior executive at a private equity firm. To the public, he was a devoted husband to his wife, Margaret, a woman who had stood by him for nearly 3 decades. But behind closed doors, he had been sneaking around with Linda, taking her on expensive trips, buying her jewelry, and meeting her in high-end hotels under fake names. She had been careful, but not careful enough. It hadn't taken me long to collect the proof: photos, credit card receipts, email exchanges, even private text messages where Linda mocked Margaret, calling her pathetic and blind for not noticing the affair. Once I had enough, I sent everything anonymously to Margaret, along with a simple message. "Your husband has been lying to you for years. If you want the truth, go to La Belle at 7 p.m. this Friday. He'll be there with her." Margaret didn't disappoint. That Friday evening, Linda and Richard had met for dinner at La Belle, one of the most exclusive restaurants in the city, a place where business elites and socialites gathered. Linda had dressed for the occasion, wearing an elegant navy blue dress and expensive diamond earrings, probably another gift from Richard. But just as they were enjoying their overpriced wine, Margaret stormed in. The restaurant fell silent as she marched toward their table, her face twisted in fury. She wasn't alone. She had brought friends, and one of them had their phone out, already recording. "You disgusting, lying piece of garbage." Margaret's voice cut through the air like a knife. Linda barely had time to react before Margaret grabbed Richard's drink and threw it in his face. Gasps filled the room as the red wine dripped from his hair onto his designer suit. Richard stammered, trying to calm her down, but Margaret wasn't done. She turned to Linda, eyes burning with rage. "And you," she spat. "How dare you? You smug, arrogant, home-wrecking whore. I welcomed you into my home. I treated you like a friend. And this is how you repay me." Linda's face drained of color. "Margaret, please, let's not make a scene." "A scene? You think this is a scene?" Margaret let out a bitter laugh. "No, sweetheart. A scene is what I'm about to make." She pulled out her phone and held it up for everyone to see. "This is your precious Linda," she announced to the entire restaurant. "A cheating, lying snake who's been screwing my husband behind my back for years. I have the receipts. I have the messages. I have everything. And now, so does the entire internet." A notification pinged on Linda's phone. Margaret had just posted everything online. The photos, the texts, the receipts, every last shred of proof. And it was spreading fast. Linda jumped up, her chair screeching against the floor. "Margaret, stop this." "Or what?" Margaret's voice dripped with venom. "Are you going to threaten me? Manipulate me? Try to gaslight me like you've done to everyone else? Not this time, Linda. You're done." By now, the entire restaurant was watching, phones out, recording the disaster unfolding before them. Linda, humiliated beyond words, turned to Richard. "Say something," she begged. But Richard was already getting up, throwing cash on the table, muttering, "I need to go," before practically running for the exit. Linda was left standing there, shaking, as Margaret took one last step toward her and whispered, just loud enough for everyone to hear, "Enjoy your new reputation, Linda. You've earned it." The video went viral within hours. By the next morning, Linda's name was everywhere, on gossip blogs, business news sites, even local TV. The footage of her panicked face, her desperate attempts to explain herself, had been watched by hundreds of thousands of people. Comments flooded in. Karma finally got her. She thought she was untouchable? Look at her now. That woman ruined so many lives. She deserves this. And just like that, whatever was left of Linda's carefully built reputation was gone. Her downfall didn't stop there. Her husband Thomas had been suspicious for years but had never found concrete proof, until now. The moment he saw the video, he confronted Linda at home. She tried to lie to spin the story, but he had already seen enough. He told her to pack her things and get out. She begged, screamed, even tried to accuse him of giving up on her in her time of need, but he didn't care. "You destroyed our marriage the moment you crawled into bed with that man," he told her coldly before shutting the door in her face. With nowhere to go, Linda tried to reach out to her former colleagues, hoping to salvage what was left of her career. But her old firm had already made it clear they wanted nothing to do with her. The financial fraud case had been airtight, and any hope she had of suing them vanished the moment she realized that no lawyer would take her case. Desperate and alone, she turned to the one person she thought she could still manipulate. Alex. She showed up at his apartment late one evening, looking nothing like the confident, powerful woman she used to be. Her makeup was smudged, her clothes wrinkled, her hair unkempt. She knocked, and when he answered, she immediately launched into a tearful speech. "Alex, honey, I need you," she pleaded. "Everything is falling apart. I've lost my job, my home, my reputation." He didn't let her finish. "You did that to yourself," he said, his voice flat. Linda recoiled. "Alex, please. You're my son. I know I made mistakes, but I need you now more than ever." He stared at her for a long moment, then shook his head. "You ruined my marriage. You lied to me my entire life. You destroyed everything you touched. And now you want me to save you." Her lip trembled. I don't have anyone else." "That's not my problem," he said, his voice colder than she had ever heard it. And then, without another word, he shut the door in her face. For the first time in her life, Linda had no one left to control. No one left to manipulate. No one left to clean up her mess. And that was her final, bitter defeat. Linda had spent her entire life believing she was untouchable. She had built a reputation, a career, a marriage, all carefully crafted to ensure that she was seen as powerful, respected, and feared. But now she had nothing. After the financial fraud scandal and the affair exposure, everything unraveled faster than even I had expected. She lost her prestigious job, her social standing, and her home. The once proud woman who had humiliated me in front of an entire family, who had spent years trying to destroy my marriage, was now the subject of mockery, scorn, and complete social exile. Her husband Thomas had thrown her out without a second thought. Their divorce was swift. He had a prenuptial agreement that left her with almost nothing. All their shared assets were in his name, and once the affair was made public, he had every legal reason to ensure that Linda walked away with only the clothes in her suitcase. Linda had tried to fight it. She hired a lawyer, tried to claim emotional distress, even attempted to pin some of her financial crimes on Thomas to extort a settlement from him. But Thomas was prepared. He had evidence of her long-term infidelity, her financial misconduct, and her abusive behavior. In the end, the court sided with him. Linda walked away with no alimony, no property, and a mountain of legal fees she couldn't afford to pay. Her friends abandoned her next. The same social circle that had once admired her quickly turned their backs when she became a liability. No one wanted to be associated with a disgraced fraudster and homewrecker. Invitations stopped coming, messages were ignored, and former friends whispered behind her back at events she was no longer welcome to attend. With no job, no husband, and no friends, Linda was forced to downsize in the most humiliating way possible. She moved into a tiny rundown apartment in a bad part of town, paying for rent with what little savings she had left. But that money didn't last long. Soon, she was desperate for work. She tried to get another high-level finance job, but word had spread. No reputable firm wanted anything to do with her. She applied for lower positions, but even then, her reputation followed her. Eventually, she had no choice but to take whatever she could get. Linda Holloway, once a woman of wealth and influence, was now working as an administrative assistant in a small, struggling office that paid barely above minimum wage. Her co-workers, people she would have once sneered at, whispered about her behind her back. Some recognized her from the viral video of her affair scandal. Others knew about the fraud. She was a joke, a cautionary tale, a living example of what happens when arrogance goes too far. But even with all of that, she still wasn't done trying to crawl back into my life. It started with emails. Long, rambling messages about how everything had been a misunderstanding, about how she had been pushed into a corner and had acted out of fear. She begged me to help her, to convince Alex to talk to her again, to help her find a way to rebuild. I never responded. Then she started showing up. The first time, she came to our old apartment. She rang the doorbell over and over until I finally looked through the peephole. Seeing her standing there, looking disheveled and desperate, should have made me feel something. Pity, maybe, or satisfaction. But all I felt was indifference. I opened the door just enough to speak. Leave. Olivia, please just let me talk to Alex. He doesn't want to talk to you. And neither do I. Just 5 minutes. I shut the door in her face. She didn't take the hint. A week later, she found out we had moved into a new house. A beautiful, spacious home in a quiet, gated neighborhood. One that Linda would have once considered worthy of her son. It was supposed to be our fresh start. A place where we could leave all the toxicity behind. But Linda had no intention of letting go. One evening, Alex and I were sitting in our living room, talking about nursery plans. I had just found out I was pregnant, and for the first time in years, I felt like my life was finally mine again. We were happy. Free. And then the doorbell rang. Alex checked the security camera. His entire body tensed. "It's her," he muttered. I sighed. "She's never going to stop, is she?" He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw something different in his eyes. Something final. "No," he said, "she won't." He opened the door, stepping outside before she could force her way in. I stayed behind, watching through the window as they spoke. Linda looked awful. Her expensive clothes were gone, replaced by something cheap and worn. Her hair, once perfectly styled, was a mess. Her makeup, something she used to obsess over, was barely there, making the exhaustion on her face even more obvious. "Alex, honey, I just want to talk," she said, her voice shaking. "There's nothing left to talk about," he replied, his tone flat. She reached for his arm. "I'm your mother. You stopped being my mother the moment you tried to destroy my wife." Linda flinched. I made mistakes, but I need you. I have no one else. And that's not my problem," he said, echoing the exact words he had told her the last time she had come begging. Tears welled up in her eyes. "Please, Alex, I don't even have a place to go anymore. I'm losing everything." "That's your own fault." She stared at him, as if waiting for him to change his mind, to give in like he always had before. But this time he didn't. "Go," he said firmly. "And don't ever come back." Linda opened her mouth, then closed it. Her shoulders slumped. For the first time, she truly looked defeated. She turned and walked away. Alex stood there, watching her disappear down the street. When he finally came back inside, he let out a deep breath and pulled me into his arms. "It's over," he whispered. And it was. Linda had spent years trying to control everything, to manipulate, to destroy anyone who didn't fit into her perfect vision of the world. But in the end, she hadn't needed me to ruin her life. She had done that all by herself. I didn't have to take revenge. I didn't have to fight. I didn't have to waste another second of my time thinking about her. Karma had done everything for me. And as I placed my hand on my stomach, feeling the tiny life growing inside me, I realized that for the first time in years, I wasn't looking back anymore.